I didn't have an academic mentor in terms of the environment, but I had a wonderful graduate school mentor, Irv Zola, who died at a young age. And he worked in the field of medical sociology. And he taught me how you have to use your own embodied experience to understand a larger problem. He was a leader in looking at the social causes of illness and the importance of social stress and the importance of direct engagement between people, at the honesty of doctor-patient relationships. And later in his career began to look at disability and was one of the founders of the area of disability studies, and wrote a wonderful book called Missing Pieces, in which he came to grips with his own disability. He had polio as a child with a lot of after effects, and then was in a terrible car crash, and as a result had legs that really couldn't get him around. So he was most of his life on half arm crutches. But he never thought about that, and he never wrote about that. He was a great scholar of everything else in medical sociology, one of the founders of the field. And when he came to realize the embodiment that this had meant to him, he went over and spent a bunch of time in the Netherlands, in an entire village created for people with disabilities. And he then understood the intersection between the lived personal embodied experience, the groupness of when people begin to realize this together and help each other to form organizations to change the world, and the policy that needs to be done, the way that caregivers, health professionals need to understand this and reframe their understanding of the world. And so he didn't really know much about the environment. And I think he was exactly the kind of mentor I needed, even if he didn't teach me about the environment, because he really put together all of those different elements and helped me then to transpose that from looking at medical and mental health topics to then begin looking at environmental health topics. Then I had a more distant mentor, Lois Gibbs, really who we think of as the founder of the modern environmental movement, who, by launching what she did at Love Canal, was just a great role model. And we've been friends and colleagues over the years, and even though she, as you may have seen, she wrote a foreword to the book, she was never the academic mentor, but she was the social mentor, and I think that we all need a person like that. Well, I think Sandra Steingraber's book, Living Downstream, that we talked about before, because she also does this thing that I talked about, taking her own embodied experience of living with cancer and trying to figure out where could it have come from, looking at her friend's cancer, looking at Rachel Carson's life and the difficulties that she had with the corporate world, with the government world, and with the scientific world, making known what she had found. And also because like Rachel Carson, it synthesizes so much knowledge and puts it together in a way that the average person can read it and understand it and make sense of it, and has the courage to say, I am a biologist, but I'm going to write for an audience that's beyond just the biology audience. I want to write for an educated lay public and make my message known. And the way she weaves stories in and out, her story, her friend's story, Rachel Carson's story, the way she looks at the different media, the air, the water, the soil, the way she uses her poet's voice, the way she uses her rich narrative voice. It's a beautiful combination. And I think it grabs people an awful lot. And this is a woman who is so skilled that she not only writes and teaches about the environment, but she teaches writing workshops. So I think when people read the book, they don't just read the book, they learn about a person. And the wonderful movie that was done about this book is a great example too. In terms of a single movie, I'm not sure. I mean, I think Erin Brockovich is probably the most wonderful movie because it shows, like we see with so many toxic activists, a very ordinary citizen discovering through their own hard detective work what needs to be done, and challenging authority and being willing to take chances and to really shake and move a lot of people. And I think it's also wonderful because it's such a gutsy person, and that really is what the Ann Andersons and the Lois Gibbs of this world are like. And the people that I work with today in toxic groups, they're like that. They're really gutsy. They're usually women. They're women who get into this usually because they're worried about their kids' health, and their kids, in fact, may have become ill. And I admire that kind of portrayal. I think that they did a great job in that movie. Also, it was the kind of thing that just shocked me so much that it would become such a popular movie, because it was really, I thought, so controversial. That's a very hard kind of question, because I like to go back and say that the first work that impelled a lot of us to do environmental sociology as a field was a book by Kai Erikson called Everything in Its Path. And it was about the Buffalo Creek flood in Appalachia. And if you remember, there was this dam burst at an impoundment of coal ash a year or two ago in Appalachia. It was a kind of similar thing. But this was a book that looked at the history of Appalachia. It looked at the poor corporate practices of the mining company, and it looked at this ordinary community devastated by the problem. And it told us that we need to have a whole new approach to looking at disaster, and that the average everyday disaster was not a natural disaster, but it was a human-made or human-exacerbated disaster. And it's a beautifully written book, also very poetic, by a man who was very well recognized in his field even before, and then became more so after, was president of the American Sociological Association. But it was mainly because it was a book that put so many of us on the path of looking at environmental sociology. So it wasn't about toxic waste in the same sense. I think one of the early books that came out around the same time as mine, I mentioned the book about Love Canal by Adeline Levine, was a very powerful book. Michael Edelstein wrote a book called Contaminated Communities, and he and I were both working on this area of research at the same time. I had a chance to look at some of his work in draft form, and helped me think through a lot of issues, and it had a lot of impact on many other people, helping them to take some of the lessons of Kai Erikson's book and now apply it specifically to contamination sites. Well, I think the one I started with, No Safe Place, even though it's now old, I did get a chance to revise it, to update it at the time of Jonathan Harr's book, A Civil Action. And Jonathan Harr kindly wrote an introduction to my book, to my new edition. But I think in a way it's foundational. A lot of people have used it, even if this sounds immodest, to study contaminated communities, toxic activism. It's dated in the sense that it talks about a lot of other sites and other EPA issues and other policy issues at the time that would be less familiar to people. And that would make me want people to read Toxic Exposures, my book that just came out a year or two ago, instead, because it's more up to date, and it would just sound more familiar to people. But I guess they're a pair, and they fit together nicely, sandwiched with a number of years. My whole environmental health career is sandwiched in between those two books. It's hard to say one. Lois Gibbs, for years, was the pioneer with her CHEJ, the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, which is a national group that helps local citizens organizations get the technical expertise and the political skills and organizing skills they need, and has been a beacon for a lot of people at a national level. But then there's a similar group at a local level, Toxics Action Center, which is a New England-wide group that does a lot of similar kind of things. I admire very much the local organizations that I partner with in a number of grants and projects. A group called the Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island, and another group called ENACT, the Environmental Neighborhood Awareness Committee of Tiverton, which is a town about 20 miles to the east of here, just south of Fall River. So we work on a lot of different projects together with ENACT. We work together to help them deal with the cleanup of a massive contamination that's made their land so unusable that the town had a moratorium on digging. They couldn't fix a foundation, plant a bush, play on the soil, or do anything of that sort. With the Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island, after we finish this interview, I'm going to be going over to our community environmental college. We run high school classes during the summer. We've got 2 8-week classes, one on environmental justice, another on food justice. And the students are, besides learning, they're doing projects. So they're doing corner store makeovers where they help local grocery stores build new shelves, bring in fruit and vegetables, mostly from local growers, and have fairs and festivals and educational things, and help them grow their business while also making the neighborhood healthier and showing people that they can do fairly successful things without a lot of money, without a large organization, but with a deep awareness. And so these are groups that just do an enormous amount of wonderful local work. And there are hundreds and hundreds of those kind of groups all over the country. I could spend hours just giving you little thumbnails of many different groups, but those are just a few of them.